Christy with the Chirp YouTube channel. Today is the third video in my Helping Kids Learn to Talk series. And today we're going to be talking about something that I call as if speaking. You might understand it if I say it is speaking from the child's perspective. Now, this is a little bit of a tricky one to think about and to talk about because everything kind of seems backwards. Let me give you an example. Let's say that my child is reaching for a train on a shelf and he can't reach the train, but I know what he wants because he always wants this train and it's right there and he's reaching for it. Now, many parents would say, "Do you want the train?" And that's not terrible because of course you're interacting with your child. However, a better way to do it is to use as if speaking or speaking from the child's perspective and say something like, "Train, please." Think about this, especially if your child tends to use what professionals call echolalia, which is when your child does parrot talk or repeats back exactly what you say, even if that word or phrase or sentence is delayed in the repetition. So even if it's an hour later or the next day or weeks from now, your child is still saying the same exact words that someone else said, whether it's from a movie, from music, from someone in your family, something that you say on a regular basis. That is echolalia. There are lots of reasons why kids use echolalia. It's a functional tool for our kids. It's not something we want to wipe out. It's something we want to pay attention to and harness so that our kids can learn from it. And one of the ways that we do that is we give them chunks of language that they can use immediately and in that echolalic fashion that will be useful and appropriate coming from their mouths. If I say, "Do you want the train?" that is not a chunk of language that my child can just reproduce and it will sound appropriate and get him what he wants. Because if he walks up to the shelf and tells another kid or a grown-up, "Do you want the train?" the child is not going to know what that means. The child or the other adult is going to think that means, what, do I want the train? No, I don't want the train. But the child will get more and more frustrated, the child who is using this echolalic phrase, because he has heard it before in order to get what he wanted. Instead, we need to be using as if speaking. We need to speak from our children's perspectives. So in this circumstance, as I mentioned, you might say something like, "Train, please." You might expand it if your child has a little more language. You might say, "I want the train, please," or "Train, please, Mama." We have to keep in mind here too, another topic that I will discuss further in later videos is that we want to be careful not to use more language than our child's brain can process and that our child can put out of her mouth. So if my child is producing one word at a time, no matter how many she can understand receptively, that is through her ears, if she's only able to put out one word at a time, I don't want to model for her phrases that are any longer than one word plus one. So that would be 2 words. In the situation of the train, if my child is a one-word speaker, then I would not use the longer sentence, "I want the train, please, Mama." I would use "Train, please," just 2 words, because even though my child is able to understand at a higher level, the brain still needs to hear the model, "Train, please," hear the model, process the model, put it down through the muscles and the motor pieces of the body to the articulators and the shapers of the mouth so that the sounds get proper, and actually start practicing producing those words herself. And that takes a lot of energy. And it also takes a lot of working memory. Holding 2 words in your brain while you're trying to think of how to repeat them and produce them is 50% more than only holding 1 word in your brain. And we don't want to expand that chunk of information that needs to be held in working memory and processed not only through the brain but through all the articulators in the mouth before it can come out. So we don't want to make these phrases that we want our kids to repeat too long. If your child is doing 0 words, we just want to use 1 to 2 words. So a child who's nonverbal, we would say, train. Maybe train please. Please is kind of not that important in these scenarios because it's not that important when our kid is nonverbal to make sure that they know the word please, because we're not worried about politeness at this stage. We're just worried about appropriate requesting. Train is appropriate requesting. I usually add please just because it's pretty easy to produce because you can see it right on the lips, and also because it's a good carrier phrase for kids to know. It's good to say water please, train please, car please. It's people pay attention to you when you are polite, and so it's not terrible to teach kids the word please, but it's also not super important. So with kids who are nonverbal, we usually start with just 1 word: train, water, car, potty, any of those things. If your child is using 1 word, then you don't want to use more than 2 to 3 words. I want train would be perfect. And you can keep going up from there. The important thing is we don't use too many words when we're creating a phrase that we want to model for the child, and that we're modeling something that is information, a chunk that the child can reproduce exactly, and it will be appropriate. Imagine that you are creating the scripts that you want your child to use in all of these circumstances. What would you like to give if your child's the actor and the play is how to have snack? Then which lines would you give your student to say? Make them appropriate. Something like, fruit snacks please, or I want water. Those are appropriate things to say at snack. So those are the things you will want to model for your child. Another area where we can work on as-if speaking is turn-taking. Turn-taking is something that's very difficult for most kids, and it's especially difficult for kids who have any sort of social difficulties. So for example, kids on the autism spectrum, or any developmental difficulty where there's a social problem, or impulsivity. Impulsivity makes turn-taking really hard, of course. One of the things that I do when I'm playing a game with a child who demonstrates echolalia is when it's my turn, I will say something like, your turn, Christy, and I'll point to myself. Your turn, Miss Christy, and then I'll take my turn, and my turn will be over, and it will be Ethan's turn, and I'll say, my turn, and I'll help Ethan pat himself on his chest like this, except for his chest, and I'll say, my turn. And before long, Ethan will start saying, my turn, when it's his turn, and he'll start saying, your turn, Miss Christy, when it's my turn. You can see that it all sounds kind of complex as I'm trying to explain it because I don't have another little kid here to demonstrate, but you can imagine in your head how this would work. The kid hears exactly what he's supposed to say so many times that it becomes very natural for him or her to say exactly those things. It becomes much more natural for us too to model in this way. It's very awkward at first because it sounds backwards and it sounds odd, and I'm not used to thinking from someone else's perspective. However, it's very good to practice, and it is good for all kids. Most kids go through a phase where they get pronouns all messed up, and parents a lot of times, or other family members, guardians, aren't sure how to work on correcting those pronouns. And the best way is exactly this, as if speaking. Speak from your child's perspective, give your child a script to follow, provide a model that your child can use exactly, and it will sound appropriate. I hope that this video was fun for you today and that it made you think. Practice this skill at home this week and see what happens. It's kind of miraculous, the kind of changes that I've seen in kids when I have used this tip. Have a great week, stay healthy, and I'll see you next week. Bye.